Tuesday night situational update on high-path avian influenza in Ontario, focused on our small flock stakeholders. I'm Ashley Honsberger. I'm the Executive Director for Poultry Industry Council, and I'm pleased to be co-hosting this event with the folks at OMAFRA who provided granting to ensure that this series continued on throughout the month of May. So this is our second last edition, unless anything else happens in the next few weeks. We're also joined, of course, by CFIA and AHL Labs, and we got some bird folks on. For those of you who are new to the discussion, I just wanted to point out we have a whole slew of resources available on the Poultry Industry Council website. So you just navigate to our homepage, you hit that Biosecurity and Disease tab, and there's maps, there's links, there's phone numbers, there's all sorts of stuff. So please keep that handy in case you have questions moving forward as things progress. So tonight we have, as I mentioned, a whole slew of folks here to provide brief updates on various things that have happened in the last week, as well as provide answers to any questions you may have. So when you do have questions, just pop them into that Q&A down at the bottom of the page, and we'll get to them. So first up, we're going to have Binu George. From OMAFRA, we have Dr. Luci Rosca and Al Dam, our poultry specialist. We've also got Dr. Brian Stevens online. He's going to give us a brief update on some of the interesting things that he's been seeing. And then we've also got Dr. Emily Martin available too, if there's any questions that are under her purview. So once again, thank you for joining us and staying informed. And I guess we'll just get going here. We'll have Binu join me on stage.
Thank you, Ashley, and welcome back, everybody. Since we got together last Tuesday, there has been an addition of one new infected premise called IP26, located in the regional municipality of York. Response actions are continuing at different levels at all of the infected premises, and the maps are being updated with the addition or removal information, so continue to watch the map on the CFIA website. The primary control zone accounts for the movement of poultry in, out, and through the area. Commercial poultry can be placed in an infected zone only with prior approval. In the last 10 days, a number of infected zones within the primary control zone is no longer marked. This is because in each of these infected premises, or IPs as they are called, disposal has been completed either as cleaning and disinfection completed for very small premises or by capping of compost piles with required dead bird surveillance and release testing for commercial flocks. Now, everyone in that zone, apart from the infected premises itself, will only need to meet the restricted zone conditions for any movements. Again, for that, please contact the movement control for specifics of what can and cannot happen. There is usually a lot of conversation that includes the terms commercial and non-commercial poultry. So how do we differentiate between the two? Commercial poultry can be defined as chicken and turkey raised under Canada's supply management or quota system for producing or selling their products or breeding for these purposes, or birds raised outside the quota system on a premises with 300 or more for producing or selling their products or breeding for these purposes. And non-commercial poultry can be defined as birds raised in smaller flocks of fewer than 300 for producing or selling their products locally for limited sales or for breeding for these purposes. Now, any consideration of the placement of commercial birds within the infected zone would be done through our movement and permitting group, which is in a better position to direct you on the conditions that would need to be met, as no two situations are exactly alike. It is always preferable that movement requests are submitted at least 5 days in advance. We recommend 1 week through the regular communication channels to ensure that we can issue the permits provided that everyone is in compliance. The birds placed will be under the restriction of the zone. This includes that the issuance of permissions for the movement out of, within, into, and in transit of live birds originating from non-commercial farm, such as small flock sizes less than 300 of any age is prohibited. This excludes the movement of birds to slaughter and under the conditions of a specific permit. Now, avian influenza continues to be a global issue. Wild birds, especially waterfowl, are natural reservoirs of influenza viruses. They are not normally affected by the disease, but can still transmit it to domestic birds. The disease can spread to birds through contact with infected poultry and poultry products. It can also spread through contaminated manure, litter, clothing, footwear, vehicles, equipment, feed, and water. So anyone with farm animals must practice good biosecurity habits that includes maintaining high sanitation standards, keeping your poultry away from areas frequented by wild birds, maintaining strict control over access to poultry houses, making sure that equipment is cleaned and disinfected before taking it into poultry houses, ensure that you do not keep bird feeders or create duck ponds close to poultry barns because they attract wild birds, and a slew of other things which you can find on the CFIA website as information, which is very useful. As always, CFIA is continuing the response to sick bird calls and high mortality calls, and our sampling teams are following up on these. CFIA website is updated with pertinent information regularly. If you have any questions surrounding the movement of live birds, please reach out to the number or email on our website to get answers for your queries on permits. And as always, thank you for your time and patience as we navigate through the situation.
Thank you, Binu. So now we see Dr. Luci is going to give us an update.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for having me today. Some information about avian influenza status. Ontario has 26 infected premises with 1 extra from last week. The minister's order related to birds commingling has been lifted as of May 20th. And the Animal Health Laboratory reported a positive H5 poll sample on pigeons from an infected premise. Keep in mind that pigeons with highly pathogenic avian influenza often have both neurological, like twisted necks, and digestive, like greenish diarrhea signs, followed by death. Signs of the avian influenza in pigeons may resemble like paramyxovirus, which is a Newcastle disease. About the other provinces, Alberta added 1 more premise and is now at 29. British Columbia has 3 new premises, bringing their total to 12. No changes in numbers of outbreaks in the other provinces. Quebec is at 7, Saskatchewan is 12, Manitoba and New Brunswick each has 1. United States reported 351 cases in 35 states, affecting about 38 million birds. And among those outbreaks, 168 are small flocks. About the rest of the world, Asia, further cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza in poultry flocks has been reported in Japan, Nepal, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Africa, as further cases are reported in poultry in Nigeria and South Africa. Highly pathogenic avian influenza virus has been detected in Gabon for the first time. We always look for what Europe is doing so we can learn from their experience. As of May 24, they were detected 2,403 cases of H5 avian influenza in wild birds, and 2,260 outbreaks in poultry premises, although there's a downward trend observed with the infected premises reported. UK, the risk of H5 infection in wild birds in the country is maintained at high risk. The risk of exposure of poultry across the whole country is maintained at low, where good biosecurity is applied, and at medium, where biosecurity is suboptimal. Just reminding you that Great Britain recorded about 98 outbreaks since October last year. They also had a mandatory housing measure for poultry and captive birds that was introduced across the country in November 2021 to help to stop the spread of the bird flu, but have been lifted as of May the 2nd. poultry and other captive birds, they are no longer needed to be housed unless they are in a protection zone and can be kept outside. However, it was reminded that it is vital for bird keepers to remain vigilant for sign of disease and maintain stringent standards of biosecurity. And finally, I do have some information about the virus survival. It will retain its infectivity in the environment at low temperatures for up to 45 days at 4 degrees Celsius. As higher temperature, sunlight intensity, and day length reduce virus survival, environmental decay will be occurring at a faster rate. The survival at 20 degrees Celsius drops to 18 days, supporting declining virus infectivity in the environment. Keep in mind that resident birds, which are like species which breed here and can be relatively sedentary, can be also infected and may continue to circulate viruses and consequently act as a source of infection to poultry. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. Feel free to pop those into that Q&A at the bottom. So now we're going to have Dr. Brian Stevens join us here.
Thanks, Ashley. So I have a couple updates today. The first is that we detected the virus in a Canada goose gosling in the Ottawa area. So not a huge surprise. We were expecting that we would see it occasionally in some of these younger birds, but obviously that has potential implications for the future of these animals, because if it is getting into the young, then it could be affecting the population going forward, depending on how severely the virus affects these birds during the next few weeks. The other update is on the mammal side. So we in Ontario have a couple more suspect red foxes, and these are adult red foxes. They are H5 positive, and the samples have been sent for confirmatory testing. But as we've seen with the fox kits, we do know that red foxes can be infected by this. So it wouldn't be a huge surprise if we do have adult red foxes that are also affected. And then the other news is out of Alberta, where they detected the virus in skunks. And these skunks were showing neurological signs like we saw with the red foxes, so seizuring, some were blind. And talking to people out there, it sounds like these skunks were noted to be feeding on the meat and organs of dead wild birds. So as I had mentioned with the red foxes previously, that's a likely source that these animals are getting this virus. So right now we haven't seen any evidence of spread from mammal to mammal. It all seems to be coming from consuming infected organs and meat, but it's something that people are definitely keeping an eye out for. And anytime that we're seeing it jump into mammals, there's always that concern as to, is there any sort of change in the virus and whether or not that could mean a greater risk for humans going forward. So that's something that I know a lot of people are keeping an eye on, and we're testing a number of different mammal species to see exactly what's happening with these mammals and with the virus in them, and see if there's any specific changes that is making it a little bit easier to infect mammals, but we'll have to keep an eye on the virus going forward. And that is all I have right now.
Thank you, Brian. Now we're going to hear from Al Dam, our provincial poultry specialist.
Well, thanks, Ashley. I'm going to share my screen. I think you guys can see this biosecurity primer. I did this, feels like years ago, but a month and a bit ago. And I just want to reiterate this again, just as a reminder about what's going on in the province, since this will be the second last time I get to chat with you folks about what's going on here. Long and short of it is, we are trying to prevent disease spread in this province, right? And to do that, the commercial industry and the small flock industry and everyone else, zoos and aquariums and our non-regulated folks are trying to keep the disease out, firstly, right? And then if we have it, and you've seen CFIA's response, you want to keep it in, and then we shut it down. And if you are unlucky enough to be one of those IPs, shutting down means destruction of those animals and a quarantine zone and control zones go up around 10 kilometers around you with everything else that we need to shut this down. This does impact our trade in this country. And we're trying to reduce its impact. Now, how do we spread diseases? Of course, these birds incubating disease. So that can come from things like wild birds or birds that you potentially may have bought at an auction or a show or a buy-sell trade. Animals other than livestock. So as Brian mentioned, we're seeing it in wild birds now and other wildlife, vermin, insects, foxes and skunks, so scavengers. But like I said, it can come in practically anywhere. But our wild bird focus, it's seeming the one that has us most concerned right now still. And of course, clothing, shoes, hair of visitors, and employees moving from farm to farm or wherever. Also contaminated feed. Water can be a big one, and that's what we've seen with some of these ponds where your ducks have gone down the pond every day, and that's how they picked it up from the wild birds. Bedding and soil can be an issue. And of course, carcasses of dead birds, and that's our concern with it jumping into things like raptors, scavengers, turkey vultures, that we could be spreading disease back and forth, both to your neighbors and to wild birds if you guys have it, or you're bringing the disease right to your farm. Contaminated farm equipment and vehicles, airborne particles, etc. But yes, this is just the schematic of what I just talked about. We see transmission within birds, but we move disease around. We are fantastic moving disease around the poultry industry. That's what we seem to do really well, and that's a function both of small flocks and commercial flocks. I'm not going to pick on either one. I'm going to pick on both because we can be really good at doing that. Now, when it comes to the health status of your flock, you guys know when things are good, you know when things are bad. So, you know, if you've got any issues with your flock you're concerned, well, then don't bring them to shows or auctions. And I know, you know, in some cases, that's how you get rid of your crap birds. Well, that could be an issue, or you could be bringing it back from you that way. All these things here, I know you guys don't want to hear, right? I'm not going to read through them, but long and short of it is we're not out of the woods yet. I'm really hoping the weather is going to help us. You know, the heat is trying things out. It's killing virus in the environment. I'm hoping that it's not, we don't have any hidden reservoirs that are going to still come back to bite us. Of course, you know, of our risks are the commingling. That's why we had the order. The order is now over, but that doesn't mean that disease is gone. And many other diseases have shown up at shows and auctions and everywhere else. So these diseases pose a risk. They can be a risk to your industry. It can be a risk to your hobby. It can be a risk to your birds themselves. So of course, if you're bringing birds home, quarantine them. And you know, when I say quarantine, proper quarantine, so it's not in the same building or sharing the same ventilation, that you're changing clothes, because we can have birds that have no clinical signs, and we've seen this before with this disease where ducks have harbored the disease because it's supposed to adapt to the ducks, and suddenly your chickens or turkeys died. One of the things that changed from last week, and Luci mentioned this, it's tested positive in pigeons as of the past weekend, and it was because these pigeons not look sick, but they were on an infected premise that had another bird species, and for CFIA nuked the whole place, they actually tested the pigeons and any other bird that was on there, and that was one of the things that surprised us on that. So for those of you who say that pigeons don't get AI, we beg to differ now. When it comes to things that you want to look at, it's going to be things like separating these new birds from your current flock, no common ventilation, avoiding the spread of pathogens, separate clothing, boots, and equipment, and feeding and handling of these birds at the end of the day, because you want to keep your birds healthy, the ones you have, and feed the quarantine birds last, just in case they have something, so you're not potentially bringing something from one to the other. And of course, listen to your mom, wash your hands. That is a fantastic thing to be doing all the time. Look for internal and external parasites, vaccinations, although it's not an option with HPAI, though hopefully we will get a vaccine at some point. There is a lot of research being done across the world on this specific H5N1 vaccination. And treat diseases, and sanitation of any you've transported those birds in is critical. If you have wooden crates that you move birds around in, do me a favor and burn them into ash and get plastic crates, something you can actually clean and disinfect. And then finally, know your birds, know the birds are coming onto your site, have your quarantine facility, and clean and disinfect. And I know I've said this, I've pounded this message for however long, but we can always do better. If you think you're doing a good job, great. Good ways you can do better. And finally, if you have visitors, make sure you've got some biosecurity policies that they follow, and make sure you just lower the risk, because like I said, I'm hoping that we're seeing a decline in infected premises, but we are still getting positives in the US where it's much warmer than here, and we're still getting positives out west at a fairly alarming rate, and in some zones that there's lots of poultry. And of course, plan your farm visits, or your, well, I say this to our commercial folks, plan your farm visits from flocks of higher to lower health status to minimize disease spread, which means usually younger to older. On your farm or in your loft, it's going to be making sure you deal with your youngest birds first, then deal with your oldest birds last. Going into the barn is always where the risk is, so at least have soap and hand sanitizer and disinfect everything coming in, whether it's the shovel, whatever. I know we love to take pictures of birds. Your cell phone is probably one of the dirtiest pieces of equipment you carry on you on a regular basis, so these can be disinfected also. And of course, footwear, and I have a bugaboo with the plastic boots because they're slippery and you walk across gravel, they're useless, but dedicated footwear for inside your coop is almost a requirement. I've got a bit of a hate relationship with foot baths. You guys know this because they're difficult to maintain. And of course, proper clothing is going to be important, especially gloves and boots and overalls. And if you're moving birds in a vehicle, or you're moving yourself in a vehicle, then pay specific attention to things like the interior mats and of course organic matter from the tires or wheel wells. Our commercial feed guys are disinfecting tires and undercarriage of their trucks on entry to every poultry barn in the province practically right now. So that is why they're doing it. If you're seeing these trucks pulled over at the side of the highway and a guy's walking around with a sprayer, please don't hit him. He's trying to keep his clients as safe as possible and prevent disease spread. And as we've seen, this slide I've used for years, and I never thought I'd have to use it during a course of a outbreak again. But all these things that are important, including things like going into and through zones and disinfecting and everything else we've seen. So there's lots of information on the PIC website that can talk about that. And the CFIA website has all this information as far as permitting that you might need. So who we're reaching out to, you guys are kind of like preaching to the converted. That's not, you're a great target, but we want to reach everyone, commercial, non-commercial, and our small flock stakeholders, including the backyard, the urban poultry. I've thrown in pet bird owners because you've come and joined us now too over the weeks, which is fantastic. Our veterinarians on the small flock and commercial poultry side have been great assets to us. We've reached out to zoos and of course the wild bird folks, and thank goodness we've got folks like Chris Sharp and Brian Stevens giving us the what for and where all every week. And I'm sure there's other folks we need to hit too. So spring, it's been crazy. But yeah, just be sure that you don't walk disease onto your farm or your yard or your run, or make sure that you don't entice it with wild birds. Report any sickness to your veterinarian. Wild bird exclusion is going to be huge. Pick up spilled feed. Rodents are I think they're a concern we have that we may not even realize how much of an issue they are, especially the fact that rats live outside the barn. They come in and out, and they go down to drink at the pond. So, when is spring migration over? Hopefully soon. There's still a few birds still traveling north, but I'm hoping we get into the heat of summer that we can lower our risk level. But as I said before, clean, clean, and clean again. And if you have any concerns over a sick bird or you see high mortality, call this number. We've had a number of calls over the last few weeks from small flock stakeholders, and most of them, or pretty much all of them, have been negative, but this means the system's working. You guys are seeing something that doesn't seem right, and you're calling the number in, and we'll CFI will get someone out there to sample to make sure. And this has been, I think, one of the success stories of this spring is that people are actually calling the line. And of course, if you see dead wild birds with neurological issues, call Brian at Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. So we got wild bird deterrence is always an issue. We have wild bird deterrence fact sheets on our website that talk about migratory birds, and then for non-native species, you can call Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. But when things go crazy, like, are you ready? Are you ready to deal with this? You already know some of the numbers that are out there, but once again, what happens if this is your place and suddenly you start seeing some dead ducks in the pond and you see high mortality in your barn? What do? Well, first of all, call this number, call the 226 number, look at all your biosecurity measures, check the websites, including PIC and Ontario Animal Health Network, report the dead wild birds, Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, and keep cleaning. And finally, if you suspect something exists, an issue, then these guys will sample and then lock yourself down. So you're going to put yourself into quarantine until we know. And like I said, for the folks that have called this number, they've locked themselves down until we get that negative. And then, I still feel bad for them because they have a disease issue on their farm they're trying to deal with, but at least it's not high path avian influenza. So with that, stay safe, be vigilant, take care of your birds, take care of your clients, take care of the rest of the industry, and we can all do better. So with that, that's it for me. Do you want to start going through some questions, Ashley?
Sounds good. You want to just stop?
How do I? Yes, I will stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions popped up here. So someone's curious about what the criteria was that was used by the ministry to determine that the restrictive order, the minister's order for no buy-sell trades, was allowed to expire.
I feel like all the questions in that
Yeah.
panel looks like they are addressed to me. I don't understand what means in the brackets, but I suspect what that means.
That's a buy-sell trade. That's it.
Okay.
Buy-sell trade,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, we need to start with like what the criteria were used. So we were seeing that the avian influenza was spreading very quick. We saw the wild birds being tested positive. So that was the main decision, that those are the main two criteria that they were used to decide to put that in place. And it was mainly to protect the small flocks, knowing that the biosecurity with small flocks, it's a little bit more relaxed than with the commercial ones. Now, allowed to expire, wanted to remind you that we are stable right now. So we have 26 outbreaks only with 7 small flocks infected. The rest are commercial. And that's, I think that was the main criteria why, and then we are close to the end of the migration, the spring migration season too.
I guess the question that can be brought up though is that if things go to pot in the next couple of weeks, there's always the option of bringing the order back, right?
It's going to start again, like reminding you that there are other provinces that they instituted this order, but they were not mandatory. They were just requirements just to make sure that people are aware of that. And then one, it is BC, and then it's been extended until, I guess it's believed June the 13th. So.
It is a risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about whether commercial flocks were exempt from the minister's order that expired, and maybe what the difference between commercial flocks and their involvement in the minister's order is?
So we've had a list of the activities that they were not included with the order, and then it was in regards of the normal business carried at the slaughter plants, the wildlife rehab centers, the pet store and other permanent retail location, accredited veterinary facilities, zoos, and other animal experience businesses, the location where the birds are permanently housed, and any activities where a person is lawfully exercising existing Aboriginal or treaty rights. The rest was under the order, regardless what type of birds they were. But that was on the top of what CFIA had to institute on the protection zone. So if you were to be in a zone, then you will have to obey those rules from CFIA plus our ministry's order. Right now, that one has been lifted. However, you still have, if you're in a zone, then you have to obey the CFIA's rules too.
I think one thing I'll add too is that the difference between commercial flocks and some of the activities that the order dealt with. I think the main thing to stress is the commingling, right? So in commercial side, we don't really commingle birds at an auction, at a buy-sell trade, or whatever. So that was identified as a high-risk event that had to be addressed. The commercial industry can address that through the marketing boards. There was no other way through that.
So commingling, just to kind of clarify, means birds from various sources meeting in one spot versus a commercial flock where you have kind of a standard flock. They're all placed at once. They all in, kind of all out. Right?
So getting together and then spreading back and
Right.
taking the disease back too. Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure if you're gonna write this answer out, Dr. Luci. I'm just gonna ask it. How many IPs in Ontario are commercial broiler operations and how many are commercial duck operations? And do you have any sense as to why there's a difference?
I was about to put the numbers, but then it was another, like a second part of the question, which it would probably take me longer. So broiler operation in Ontario are only 2 affected and then 10 duck operation. And I cannot give you a reason, but when I compare that with the United States, entirely United States of 351 premises affected, they've had only 10 duck operation being affected. So it's not because, and then they've had mainly the turkey operation being affected. So probably I would say just a bad luck for those duck operations that it kind of like spread the virus and then being in an area where mostly wild birds being transmitted the virus. So it's not a criteria where what's the percentage difference. It's just bad luck, I would say.
Yeah. Right. I think with this disease, the way it impacts poultry, and if we look at some states, high turkey positives, in some other state that's high layer positives, and then it just depends, right? But I think for ducks, this disease is especially brutal for ducks because unlike chickens or turkeys, where we see the problem in what, 3 to 5 days, Lucy, like we start seeing things die real quickly on the chicken and turkey side. With ducks, I suspect, and this is just Al, who's not an epidemiologist, right? But I suspect it festers in that duck flock potentially for weeks before you realize there's a problem. That longevity in the flock means there's way more chance for you to spread it, to other animals on the farm, to other operations. If you go to other operations, certain things like shared equipment, shared staff is going to have to be looked at. The commercial duck operation industry in Ontario has been around for over 100 years. Ducks are tough. I think ducks are tough birds, and this virus has host adapted them. So, it takes a lot to kill a duck, and this is the disease that does that.
Ducks in this case, most of them, they've had mortalities, but also the first sign that was observed, they were egg production drop. So.
Okay, so this is a 2-part question. We'll just handle the first part first. So why would the minister's order be lifted if the risk for poultry is still high?
So I think Al explained a little bit with one of his slides that we know it's still high, but we are at the end of the migration season. Like I said, it seems like it is being under control with the small flux. So we suspected there will be more, but it looks like it is under control at this point, and we didn't have further. So we're stable with the outbreaks. Like I said, we were at 26 today, like only 1 in 1 week, which is very low. So
I think we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't, right? Like if we extended the order, someone will be mad at us. If we didn't extend the order, somebody, and it is a bit of a gamble, right? We're counting on folks to do the right thing. If you screw that up, then well, we have to revisit stuff. So, the risk assessment with weather and everything else, as Luci mentioned, is looking, I'm gonna say better, not great, but we're hoping that we can keep this disease in check.
And
And
the
oh,
the
sorry.
other part, sorry, yeah, you could go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna, the second part is clarifying, so the 18 days that the virus is active in the environment with the 20-degree weather tamping it down, do we need 18 days of 20-degree weather, or how does that work?
I would say so, yes. Reminding you about virus, protein and meat allows to stay in a fridge, so it will prolong the shelf life. So it will be the same thing for the virus. So
Okay. Thank you. And so we heard about the positive test coming in from pigeons. Is there a report available, or how do we get more information on that?
So unfortunately, the report is confidential. It's going between the veterinarian and then the flock owner. So I cannot provide you a full written report, but you have to believe me that it was a positive one. So.
Well, and I think we will get more information about this as more things come out, because we're looking at other jurisdictions, and I think I've asked Brian every week if we've had any new things like songbirds, like pigeons. So if you guys are seeing wild pigeons that are acting through feed, once again, that's another reason to send it to Brian to see, if are we seeing these pauses in pigeons because they're an infected of their species? Probably, but we don't know, right? So yeah, just stay vigilant. Yeah, the challenge is going to be with reporting that there's some confidentiality issues we'll have to get, unless we can get some sort of generic, something a bit more generic to talk about at a, maybe with, and actually I've talked about this, maybe later on this summer we do a hot wash of the whole thing based on small flock stakeholders, and we can talk about some of these generic issues, and we can strip information out, reports that we can show folks. It's too early yet.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So Dr. Brian, you mentioned about the gosling. Is there any other permanent resident birds you're seeing affected, and particularly any songbird cases kick up yet?
So permanent resident birds, I mean, we've seen a few raptors that are permanent residents, so great horned owls and red-tailed hawks. So it definitely is affecting some of those birds. As for songbirds, we haven't had a reported case of it yet. We are still testing every songbird that comes through, but we haven't seen it in the wild songbirds as of yet.
That's good news. Can anyone comment on what foxes or skunks or look like, basically, if they're infected? Because obviously folks live rural, there's a lot of these guys running through their yards every day. What should they be looking for?
So what we've seen reported is neurological signs. So typically that's a fox that's going to be acting weird, often having seizures, potentially blindness. So really anything where a fox or a skunk is acting abnormal would be something to report. And I would say the best thing to do would be to contact a wildlife rehabilitator if you do notice anything like that, because they'd be able to help you out from there. And then if you do find dead foxes or skunks on your property, because there are times when these animals die without anybody witnessing them, definitely contact us at the CWHC, and we'll definitely want to try and get that in and test it.
And I want to add those for the ones in central Alberta that have been confirmed. There was an unusual large number of calls about skunks that they were acting strange or being found dead. And it was all between the area where they were confirmed the avian influenza virus present in the snow geese. And we know there's nothing to stop these animals from hunting and eating, infecting wild birds, which is the bigger risk. The strategies is to reinforce the message of keeping people and pets away from wildlife and all kinds like that or alive.
I guess pulling that string a little bit louder or a little bit further, Brian, if some of our folks that are on the call or out in the farm and they see a fox acting funny, they pull out the rifle to shoot it, they can still call you, even though it's got a high-speed lead injection as part of its mortality?
Yeah, I mean, definitely you can still call us and we'll do what we can. Even if the brain isn't available for testing, we still have things like the lung and spleen that we can test as well. So we always have organs available. But I would still say, try not to kill wildlife unless there's a real reason for it, because we run into that issue
Yeah. But I guess,
enough already.
Well, but I guess the first thing that everyone's concerned about when they see a neurological
Yes.
skunk, whatever, is rabies, right?
Yep.
And so that'll be the first test you'd probably do, and then if it's rabies negative, well, you'll be looking for everything anyway. So
Yeah. So we typically are looking for multiple things. And a lot of times the Ministry of Natural Resources is involved in a lot of those cases. So they may take it in for rabies testing and then get it to us afterwards as well. On my end, I typically would be testing for AIV first, just because we don't want to contaminate other parts of our lab with that virus. But then we'd be doing other testing to look for rabies and other viruses as well.
Does rabies look very much different from AI, or?
Clinically, it can look very much the same. It's neurological signs. So any animal acting strangely could be a number of different viruses, one of which is HPAI and another is rabies.
Okay. And have we seen any other cases of small ruminants, particularly goats, infected, or any other species? No.
No,
I haven't
not
heard
that
of,
I know of it.
I was going to say, I haven't seen anything in wildlife, at least outside of the foxes and skunks so far.
fortunately, they don't tend to forage on carcasses.
Yeah.
That's true.
They can be in the same pasture where Canada geese are crapping all over the place. So I guess,
Yeah.
Anyways, never say never.
Any pet parrots been affected by AI?
I don't think we've seen any here. I don't know if Emily's still on or not. If she's seen anything come through. Is Emily still on?
She is.
Yep.
Oh, there you are.
I haven't seen anything come through, and I haven't heard of anything. I don't know whether Brian's heard of anything, but I certainly haven't.
No, I haven't heard of anything on my end either.
Okay.
I think a lot of the pet bird folks have been keeping their birds inside. I have heard of folks that are still free flying bird. I get really nervous about, especially if they're congregating around bird feeders with every other thing that's out there. So yeah, I could give you any recommendation or advice. Don't free fly your pet bird if you really love it.
Got it. Okay, one more question. Anyone else have any questions? Feel free to pop them in. Can we just talk a little bit about how this pigeon was tested and what kinds of samples might have been taken as far as internal or external as far as on the body?
So they were taking samples from the cloaca and then from the conal, like oropharyngeal swabs, and they were, when they do the pool sampling, they take it from the minimum 5 birds.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, the question, reading into the question, it was, were they carrying it externally as a disease vector, or was it internal? What you're saying was internal.
Yes.
Thank you. Last call for questions. Oh. When chickens are allowed to free range, should we worry about insects they eat or any other things like that as carriers?
For avian influenza, I don't think it's, well, let's walk this through, right? I think Lucy mentioned, you mentioned weeks ago that you've seen that flies.
The flies, yes.
Period. Things like darkling beetles or any beetle that will eat at a carcass could be of a concern, right? And not just for AI, but a whole host of anything else like Salmonella, E. coli, whatever. So yeah, if you've got a rotting carcass sitting in your pen and there's maggots there, that I clean up the damn carcass. Let's just say that. But anything else, I haven't heard of things like crickets or anything like that being carriers.
Okay. And do we have any details as far as the infected duck premises? Were they all indoors or did they have access to the outdoors?
I think we've had commercial and we've had a small flock that included ducks. So they were indoor and outdoor. So both options were affected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the commercial ducks, of course, will have been indoors with no outside access. And of course, the small flock positives have been running around.
Right. Okay. Okay, we'll just give it a
Biosecurity and then human transmission, like humans can carry it up on their boots.
right. Alrighty, I'm not seeing any other burning questions, so we'll just call it a night there. Thanks everyone for providing all this great information. Thanks everyone who's been hanging on the line here and hanging out with us every Tuesday. So we'll see you next week for our final installment of this. We're gonna have some interesting recaps and maybe go through some best practices and stuff like that with a different veterinarian as well on the line. So be sure to tune in. Otherwise, thanks very much everyone and take care.
Have a good week, everyone.